I held the jagged piece of obsidian to my own throat, my hand trembling not from fear, but from a grief so profound it had hollowed out my bones. Below me, my father, Alpha Marcus of the Silver Moon Pack, lay in a pool of his own blood, his chest heaving with ragged, defeated breaths. The victor, the beast who had done this, stood over him, a mountain of shadow and muscle whose very presence suffocated the air. Alpha Kale of the Blackwood Pack, the conqueror, the monster. His scent was a storm of pine, cold stone, and blood. He had not come to negotiate. He had come to break us, and he had succeeded. His chilling gray eyes, devoid of any warmth, left my father's broken form and pinned me where I stood. He didn't speak the ultimatum. It hung in the air, a promise of annihilation. Marry him, bind my pack to his, and we would be spared. Refuse, and the rest of our warriors would fall before he exiled the survivors to the blighted lands where no shifter survived a winter. My father's life, my pack's future, my people's survival, it all balanced on the edge of my surrender. The obsidian bit into my skin, a single drop of blood trailing down my neck like a tear. My wolf howled within me, a cry of rage and despair, but I silenced her. I let the shard fall from my numb fingers, the clatter on the stone floor sealing my fate. I met the monster's gaze, my voice a ghost of itself, whispering the word that would cost me everything. I accept. Wait, before the next revelation unfolds, if this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To ensure you don't miss unexpected claims, broken bonds, or awakenings under the moon, subscribe and stay close. Now, back to the scene. Kale's expression didn't change. There was no flicker of triumph, no satisfaction, not even a glimmer of acknowledgement for the magnitude of my sacrifice. He simply gave a curt nod to two of his warriors, massive brutes whose faces were maps of old scars. They moved with predatory grace, one hoisting my father into his arms with unnerving gentleness, while the other approached me. I flinched, expecting a rough hand, but he only gestured toward the edge of the clearing. The message was clear. I was his now, property to be collected. I walked on legs that felt like brittle twigs, my gaze locked on my father's pale face. He was conscious, his eyes wide with shame and horror. "Ilara, no!" he rasped, the words broken. "It's done, father," I said, my voice stronger than I felt, layered with a finality that silenced him. I would not let him see me weep. I was the daughter of an alpha. I would face this with the dignity he had taught me, even if it was a dignity afforded to a sacrificial lamb. The journey to Blackwood territory was a blur of silent misery. I was placed in a crude, covered wagon, the canvas flaps doing little to block out the grim reality of my new life. Kale rode at the head of his war party, a silent, imposing figure on a warhorse that was nearly as massive as he was. He never once looked back. It was as if the transaction was complete and he had already dismissed me from his mind. My pack was now his pack. My life was now his life. The weight of it pressed down on me, a physical force that made it hard to breathe. We traveled for 2 days, stopping only for brief functional rests where tasteless rations were distributed. No one spoke to me. The Blackwood warriors looked through me, their faces hard and unreadable. I was a ghost among them, a spoil of war. In the suffocating confines of the wagon, I had too much time to think, to let the terror I had held at bay finally sink its claws into me. Stories of Alpha Kale were whispered in hushed, frightened tones around campfires. They said he'd killed his own father to take control of his pack. They said his wolf was a demon, unnaturally large and black as midnight, with eyes that glowed with malevolent fire. They said he had no mate because the moon goddess herself had cursed him, denying him a heart to love with. I believed all of it. I had seen the cold emptiness in his eyes. I had felt the chilling aura of power that radiated from him, an aura that didn't just command respect but demanded fear. And I was to be his wife. The word was a mockery. I was to be his broodmare, a vessel to secure the bloodline of the Silvermoon Pack and solidify his control. The thought made my stomach churn with a violent mix of nausea and rage. When we finally arrived at the Blackwood Fortress, my sliver of hope that the stories were exaggerated died a swift, brutal death. It was less a home and more a military garrison carved into the side of a bleak granite mountain. There were no signs of life or warmth, no laughter, no children playing, no colorful banners. Only gray stone, high walls, and watchtowers manned by archers whose gazes were as sharp and cold as the tips of their arrows. The fortress was a reflection of its master, formidable, impenetrable, and utterly without joy. I was led through a courtyard where warriors trained with a grim intensity I had never witnessed. The sounds were of grunts of effort, the clash of steel, and the harsh commands of their trainers. There was no camaraderie, only brutal efficiency. This was not a pack, it was an army. A tall, severe-looking woman with braided silver hair and eyes the color of a winter sky met me at the entrance to the main keep. Her scent identified her as Kale's Beta. She looked me up and down, her expression a mask of cool disdain. "I am Anya," she said, her voice as crisp as frozen leaves. "The Alpha has instructed me to show you to your quarters. You will be expected for the evening meal at sundown. Do not be late." She didn't offer a hand, didn't offer a word of welcome. She turned on her heel, and I had no choice but to follow, my heart sinking with every step deeper into the cold, stone heart of my new prison. The keep was as austere inside as it was out. The air was frigid, smelling of damp stone and medicinal herbs. Torches in iron sconces cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe like living things. Anya led me up a winding staircase to a heavy oak door, which she pushed open. "This will be your room." I stepped inside, half expecting a dungeon cell. I was surprised to find it was a spacious chamber, furnished with a large bed, a wardrobe, and a small table and chairs near a hearth where a fire was already crackling. A narrow, shuttered window looked out over the bleak expanse of the Blackwood Forest. It was more than I had expected, but it was still a cage. A gilded one, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. "Your clothes are in the wardrobe. A servant will bring water for you to wash. As I said, sundown. The Alpha does not tolerate tardiness." Anya's gaze lingered on me for a moment, sharp and calculating, before she turned and left, the heavy door clicking shut behind her with a sound of utter finality. I was alone. I walked to the window and pushed open the heavy wooden shutters. The wind that swept in was bitingly cold, carrying the scent of pine and coming winter. Below, the training yard continued its relentless rhythm. I saw him then, Kale. He had shed his armor and was sparring with 3 of his best warriors. He moved with a speed and brutal power that was terrifying to behold. He wasn't just fighting them, he was dismantling them, his movements economical and deadly. He dispatched them one by one, leaving them gasping on the ground, before turning to the next without a moment's pause. He was a machine of war, a monster, and I was his. A sob finally broke free, a raw, painful sound in the silent room. I sank to the floor, my back against the cold stone wall, and wept. I cried for my father, for my pack, for the life I had lost, and for the terrifying, empty future that stretched out before me. My sacrifice had saved my people, but it had utterly destroyed me. That evening, I dressed in one of the simple, dark gray dresses laid out for me. It felt like mourning clothes. A young, frightened servant girl with wide, haunted eyes brought a pitcher of hot water and a basin, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped them. She scurried away without a word, refusing to meet my eyes. The fear in this place was a palpable thing, a poison in the very air. I made my way down to the great hall, a cavernous, smoke-stained chamber dominated by a long, heavy table. Kale sat at its head, a formidable silhouette against the roaring fire in the massive hearth behind him. His warriors and the other pack members filled the benches, eating in a tense, disciplined silence that was deeply unsettling. The only sounds were the scrape of cutlery on wooden platters and the crackle of the fire. Anya gestured me to the empty seat at Kale's right hand. My stomach was a knot of dread as I sat, keeping my eyes down, focusing on the rough grain of the wooden table. The food was simple and unappetizing. A thick, tasteless stew and hard bread. It was the food of a pack on the verge of starvation, yet the Blackwood pack was the most powerful in the region. It made no sense. Kale didn't speak to me, didn't even look at me. He ate with the same focused intensity he brought to everything, his presence a crushing weight beside me. I could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the clean, sharp scent of soap mixed with his own wild, earthy aroma. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. My wolf, who should have been drawn to the sheer power of an alpha, cowered within me, recognizing him not as a potential mate, but as a predator. After the meal, he rose. The entire hall fell silent, all eyes on him. "The full moon is in 5 days," he announced, his voice a low rumble that filled the hall, commanding absolute attention. On that night, the union between the Blackwood pack and the Silvermoon pack will be sealed. Ilara will stand beside me as my Luna. A murmur rippled through the crowd, quickly silenced by a single sharp look from him. He said the words without a trace of emotion, as if announcing a change in patrol schedules. My name from his lips sounded foreign, a word he had memorized for a purpose. "Until then," he continued, his gaze sweeping the room, "she is to be treated with the respect her new title affords. But she is not to leave the fortress walls. Is that understood?" A chorus of "Yes, Alpha," was his answer. His cold gray eyes finally found mine across the table. For a fleeting second, I saw something in their depths, something other than ice and granite, a flicker of something, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same unnerving emptiness. "Anya will inform you of your duties," he said, the words directed at me, though his gaze had already moved past me. He turned and strode from the hall without another word, a dark cloak swirling behind him. I was left sitting at the table, the eyes of the entire pack on me. I was to be their Luna, not a partner, not a mate, but a symbol of their alpha's latest conquest. A prisoner with a crown. And in 5 days, on the night of the full moon, my gilded cage would be locked forever. The thought was a death sentence. I had to find a way out. I had to escape, or I would die in this cold, heartless place. The next 4 days were a special kind of torment. Anya, in her clipped, efficient manner, assigned me duties that felt more like tests than contributions. I was put to work in the infirmary, a grim, stone-floored room that smelled of sickness and despair. The pack's healer, an old woman named Morwen, regarded me with suspicion, her lips pressed into a permanent thin line. The patients were a mix of warriors with training injuries and others who suffered from a strange, wasting ailment that left them weak and pale. Morwen was tight-lipped about it, muttering only about the winter chills. I also spent hours in the kitchens, helping prepare the same bland, meager stew. I saw the stores. For a pack so large and powerful, their larder was shockingly bare. They were rationing every scrap of food. It was another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. Why would a conquering alpha allow his people to live on the brink of hunger? Kael remained a distant, intimidating presence. I saw him in the training yard, in the Great Hall, moving through his fortress with a relentless, restless energy. He never spoke to me. Our only interactions were the tense, silent dinners, where I sat by his side, feeling more like a ghost than a future Luna. His indifference was a weapon, making me feel insignificant, an object he had acquired and stored away until needed. But I was not idle in my despair. I watched. I listened. I learned the layout of the fortress, the changing of the guards, the patterns of the patrols on the walls. I was the daughter of an alpha, and I had not been raised to be a docile lamb. While my hands sorted herbs or stirred pots, my mind was mapping out my escape. I would not be his. I would not be bound to a monster under the full moon. On the fourth day, I saw my chance. A supply wagon was leaving at dusk, heading out to one of the northern logging camps. It was a weekly run. Security was always a little lax during the loading, the guards more focused on the outgoing goods than on who might be slipping among them. I had saved a piece of hard bread and a small flask of water. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. My plan was simple: slip into the back of the wagon, hide among the crates and barrels, and ride out past the gates. Once clear of the fortress, I would jump and run. I would run until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, and then I would keep running. I would head west toward the Frostfang Mountains. It was neutral territory. If I could make it there, I might have a chance. As twilight bled across the sky, painting the clouds in shades of bruised purple and orange, I put my plan into motion. With my heart hammering against my ribs, I slipped out of the kitchens and hugged the shadows of the courtyard walls. The wagon was being loaded just as I'd observed. The guards were laughing, distracted by a joke one of them had told. This was it. Taking a deep breath, I darted from the shadows, a small gray blur against the gray stone. I was almost there, my hand outstretched toward the back of the wagon. And then a wall of muscle slammed into me. A hard arm wrapped around my waist, lifting me off my feet as if I weighed nothing. A hand clamped over my mouth, stifling my cry of alarm. I was hauled back into the shadows, my feet dangling uselessly. The scent of pine and cold stone filled my senses, and I knew, with a surge of pure, unadulterated terror, who had caught me. Kael. He dragged me into a dark, secluded alcove between two buildings, his body caging me against the wall. He was breathing hard, not from exertion, but from what sounded like barely controlled rage. He slowly removed his hand from my mouth, but his arm remained a steel band around my waist, pinning me to him. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" he growled, his voice a low, dangerous vibration against my back. I twisted in his grip, my own fury overriding my fear. "Let me go!" "You are going nowhere," he snarled, spinning me around to face him. In the deepening gloom, his face was a mask of cold fury. His gray eyes were like chips of ice, glittering with a dangerous light. "Your place is here. You made a bargain." "I made a bargain to save my people from a butcher," I spat, my voice trembling with defiance. "I never agreed to be your prisoner!" For a moment, I thought he was going to strike me. His jaw clenched, and a muscle jumped along his jawline. His massive hands balled into fists at his sides. He was so close I could feel the heat of his anger, see the pulse hammering at the base of his throat. But he didn't hit me. Instead, he did something far worse. He laughed. It was not a sound of humor. It was a cold, harsh, bitter sound that scraped against my nerves. "Prisoner," he said, his voice dropping to a deceptively soft, menacing tone. "You have a warm bed, food in your belly, and a roof over your head. That is more than many have. You have no idea what a true prison is." His grip on my arm tightened, and he hauled me out of the alcove, dragging me back toward the keep. "Your little escape attempt is over. You will go to your room, and you will stay there. If you try to run again, I will put a guard on your door. If you try to run from the guard, I will chain you to the wall. Do you understand me, Ilara?" The way he said my name sent a shiver down my spine. It was a threat, a promise. He thrust me toward the keep's entrance. "Go." I stumbled, catching myself on the doorframe. I looked back at him, my eyes blazing with a hatred so pure it felt like it could burn him to ash. But he had already turned his back on me, his broad shoulders a wall of indifference. He was walking away, melting back into the shadows, as if our confrontation had never happened. As I climbed the stairs back to my room, my fury gave way to a chilling despair. He had caught me so easily. He had been watching me. The realization was a cold stone in my gut. He had known all along. My meticulous planning, my desperate hope, it had all been a game to him. He was a predator, and I was his prey, and he was enjoying the chase. I slammed the door to my room, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence. I was trapped, utterly and completely trapped. Tomorrow was the full moon. Tomorrow, I would be shackled to the monster for life. The fight went out of me, replaced by a cold, heavy resignation. He had won. He had broken me, just as he had broken my father. The next day passed in a haze of dread. A different servant girl, older and less timid, brought my meals but wouldn't speak to me. I was a pariah, the foolish girl who had dared to defy the Alpha. I spent the hours pacing the confines of my room, from the window to the door, a caged animal waiting for the inevitable. As the sun began to set, casting long, bloody streaks across the sky, Anya came for me. She carried a bundle of white cloth. "It is time," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "You are to wear this." She laid the bundle on the bed. It was a simple, elegant dress of white wool, finely spun and soft to the touch. It was a bride's dress. The sight of it made me feel ill. "I won't," I said, my voice a rebellious whisper. Anya's cold eyes met mine. "You will. Do not make this more difficult than it needs to be. The Alpha is not a patient man. What happens tonight will happen, whether you are in this dress or in chains. The choice is yours." Her words were brutal, but they were true. Defiance now would only bring more humiliation. With numb fingers, I allowed her to help me into the dress. It felt like a shroud. Anya braided my hair, her touch surprisingly gentle, weaving in small white winter blossoms that one of the servants must have gathered from the sheltered corners of the keep. The gesture was so at odds with the grim reality that it almost made me cry. When she was done, she stepped back and looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression. He is waiting. The ceremony was not held in the Great Hall or any formal setting. I was led out of the fortress and up a winding path to a high, wind-swept cliff that overlooked the vast, dark expanse of the Blackwood Forest. The full moon was rising, a perfect, luminous silver disk in the inky sky, bathing the clearing in its ethereal light. The entire pack was gathered, forming a silent circle. In the center, beside a low, flat stone that served as an altar, stood Kyle. He was not in armor. He was dressed in simple black leather pants and a tunic that did little to conceal the formidable breadth of his shoulders and the raw power coiled in his frame. In the moonlight, he looked less like a man and more like a primal god of the wild. His face was stark, his features carved from stone, his gray eyes seeming to absorb the moonlight and reflect it back, colder and harder. As Anyan led me into the circle, a hush fell over the pack. All eyes were on me. I felt stripped bare, my terror and misery on display for all to see. I walked toward Kyle, each step a lifetime. My legs were shaking, but I held my head high. I would not let them see me crumble. I stopped before him, the altar stone between us. He looked at me, his gaze intense, searching. For what, I didn't know. The pack's eldest shaman, a man so old his face was a web of wrinkles, stepped forward, holding a ceremonial knife. The ritual was ancient, brutal in its simplicity. It was a binding of blood and spirit. The shaman spoke in the old tongue, his voice a dry, rasping chant that invoked the spirits of the forest and the moon goddess. He spoke of strength, of loyalty, of the continuation of the pack. The words were meaningless to me. They were a lie. Then he turned to Kyle, offering him the knife. Kyle took it and, without hesitation, sliced a deep cut across his own palm. Blood, dark in the moonlight, welled up instantly. He held his hand out over the altar. The shaman then turned to me. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the final, irrevocable moment. The shaman offered me the knife. My hand trembled as I took it. I looked at Kyle. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held mine, a silent command. I closed my eyes, took a shaky breath, and drew the blade across my own palm. The pain was sharp, grounding. I held my bleeding hand over his, letting my blood drip and mingle with his on the cold stone of the altar. The shaman's chant rose in volume, and the pack began to hum, a low, resonant sound that vibrated through the ground, through my very bones. With this blood, the packs are one, the shaman declared. With this bond, the lines are joined. Under the eyes of the moon goddess, I declare you Alpha and Luna. I declare you mate and mate. At the word mate, a jolt went through me, a shock of energy that had nothing to do with the ceremony and everything to do with the man standing before me. My wolf, so long cowering, rose up, recognizing a truth my mind refused to accept. The mate bond, it was real. Faint, suppressed, but undeniably there. I looked at Kyle in horror, and for the first time, I saw a crack in his granite control, a flash of raw, unguarded emotion in his eyes. Pain, a deep, profound pain that mirrored my own. He knew. He had known all along. He was my mate, and he had hidden it, forced me into this cold, transactional union instead of a true claiming. The realization was a fresh betrayal, a cruelty so profound it stole the air from my lungs. He was not just a monster who had conquered my pack. He was my mate, and he had rejected the sacred bond between us, twisting it into this monstrous charade. Before I could process the new agonizing wave of grief, a howl shattered the night. It was not from our pack. It was a high, keening sound of pain and madness that came from the forest below. It was answered by another, and then another, until the air was filled with a chorus of deranged howls. Cal's head snapped up, his body instantly tensing, all traces of the ceremony forgotten. He was no longer a groom. He was an alpha scenting danger. "Rogues!" Anya snarled from the edge of the circle, her hand already on the hilt of her sword. "No," Kale said, his voice a low, grim rumble. His eyes scanned the darkness of the trees below. "It's worse." The pack warriors formed a defensive line at the edge of the cliff, weapons drawn. The air, which moments before had been filled with ceremonial reverence, was now thick with the metallic tang of fear and imminent violence. I stood frozen, my bleeding palm forgotten, staring at Kale. What could be worse than rogues? And then I saw them, figures lurching out from the tree line. They were shifters, but they moved with a jerky, unnatural gait. Their forms were emaciated, their fur patchy and matted. But it was their eyes that made my blood run cold. In the moonlight, they glowed with a feverish, sickly yellow light. They were mad, utterly, irretrievably mad. "The fading sickness," I heard someone whisper in horror. Kale let out a roar, a sound of pure, untamed power, and shifted. His body contorted, bones snapping, muscles expanding. Where the man had stood, a wolf now crouched. But the stories had not done him justice. He was a beast of nightmare, a creature of shadow and fury. His fur was the color of jet, and he was nearly twice the size of any wolf I had ever seen. His eyes, those cold gray eyes, now blazed with an inner fire. He was magnificent and terrifying. He launched himself off the cliff, a black arrow aimed at the heart of the madness below. His pack warriors followed, their own shifts a ripple of cracking bone and sprouting fur. The battle began, a maelstrom of snarls, claws, and blood under the cold, indifferent light of the full moon. I was left on the clifftop with the healers and the non-combatants, my own personal hell forgotten in the face of this new, shared nightmare. Anya stood beside me, a sword in her hand, her eyes fixed on the battle below. "What is that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What is the fading sickness?" Anya's gaze didn't waver from the fight. "It is a plague, a curse. It starts in the mind, whispering paranoia and rage. Then it consumes the body, wasting it away until nothing is left but a rabid, mindless beast that attacks anything in its path. There is no cure." My mind raced, pieces of the puzzle snapping into place with sickening clarity. The guarded infirmary, the wasting patience Morwen called the winter chills, the strict rationing of food and herbs, the brutal, relentless training of the warriors. It wasn't cruelty. It was desperation. It was survival. "He's not a conqueror," I whispered, the words stolen by the wind. "He's a protector." Anya finally looked at me then, and for the first time I saw not disdain in her eyes, but a weary, bone-deep sorrow. "He is an alpha. He does what must be done to save his people, no matter the cost." She looked at my hand, still dripping blood onto the white wool of my dress. "He united our packs because your lands are rich in moon petal. It is the only thing that soothes the final stages of the sickness. He took your home to save his people from a fate worse than death. The truth was a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. I had seen a monster, a tyrant, a butcher, but I had been blind. I was looking at a king carrying a burden so heavy it had forced him to become the very thing his enemies whispered he was. He had built a fortress not to keep others out, but to keep a horrifying plague in. And the final, most devastating piece fell into place. The mate bond. He had suppressed it, hidden it, because how could he offer a true mating to someone he was forcing into a loveless bargain? How could he claim his mate with love when his hands were stained with what he had to do to save them all? The rejection wasn't a cruelty. It was a sacrifice. His sacrifice. I looked down at the battle raging below, at the massive black wolf that fought with the fury of a storm, a lone bulwark against a tide of madness. And my heart, which I thought had been shattered, broke all over again, but this time it broke for him. The battle was a blur of brutal, desperate violence. Kale and his wolves fought with the grim efficiency I had seen in the training yard, but their opponents were unpredictable, driven by madness. They felt no pain, no fear. They only knew the urge to infect, to destroy. I watched in horror as one of the rabid shifters lunged at a young Blackwood warrior, sinking its teeth into his shoulder. A collective gasp went through those of us on the cliff. It was a death sentence. The sickness was passed through a bite. Anya swore, a low, vicious sound. Morwen, prepare the black sleep. The old healer nodded grimly and hurried back toward the keep, her face a mask of sorrow. I knew what the black sleep was, a potent, merciful poison. My gaze was drawn back to Kale. He was a whirlwind of black fur and flashing teeth, a force of nature holding the line. But even he could not be everywhere at once. I saw one of the sick ones, smaller and faster than the others, slip past the main fight. It scrambled up the rocks of the cliff, its claws finding purchase, its glowing yellow eyes fixed on us. The unprotected healers, the elders, the children huddled behind us. Anya saw it too. She shoved me behind her, raising her sword. Stayed back. But my feet were already moving. I wasn't the daughter of an alpha for nothing. I had been trained to fight, even if I wasn't a frontline warrior. I grabbed a fallen branch, a heavy piece of oak that would serve as a makeshift club. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but the cold, paralyzing fear had been replaced by a surge of adrenaline. These were my people now. This was my pack. The rabid shifter crested the edge of the cliff, its lips peeled back in a grotesque snarl, saliva dripping from its jaws. It launched itself at Anya. She met its charge, her sword flashing, but the creature was unnaturally strong. It knocked her blade aside and lunged for her throat. Without thinking, I swung the heavy branch with all my might, connecting with the creature's side. The impact sent a jarring shock up my arms. The shifter yelped, a high-pitched sound of pain and rage, and spun to face me, its mad eyes promising a painful death. It was terrifyingly fast. It sprang, and I knew I wouldn't be able to bring the club around in time. I braced myself for the impact, for the teeth that would seal my fate. A black shadow descended from the sky. Kale, in his massive wolf form, landed between me and the rabid shifter. He had seen the danger from below and had scaled the cliff in a matter of seconds. He met the smaller wolf's attack with a roar that shook the very stone beneath my feet. It was over in an instant. A snap of powerful jaws, a sickening crunch of bone, and the rabid shifter lay still at his feet. Kale stood over the body for a moment, his great chest heaving. Then, slowly, he turned to face me. The blazing battle fury in his eyes softened as he looked at me, replaced by an expression of raw, fierce possessiveness and relief. He took a step toward me, then another, until he was right in front of me. He lowered his great head and nudged my hand, the one with the ceremonial cut, with his wet nose. It was a gentle, questioning touch, a gesture of concern. Behind him, the sounds of the battle were dying down. His warriors had finished off the last of the infected rogues. The immediate danger was over. Slowly, painfully, Kale shifted back. He stood before me, naked and splattered with blood, his body a canvas of scars old and new. He looked exhausted, the weight of his alpha duties pressing down on him. His gray eyes, so often cold and empty, were now filled with a maelstrom of emotions I couldn't decipher. "You're hurt," he said, his voice rough. He looked at my palm, where the cut was still sluggishly weeping blood. "It's nothing," I whispered. The pack was gathering on the cliff now, the warriors shifting back to their human forms, their faces grim. They were taking stock of their wounded, their dead. The cost of this victory had been high. "Elara," Kale said my name, and this time it wasn't a command or a statement, it was a plea. "You should not have interfered. You could have been killed." "You would have been too late," Anya said, stepping forward. She nodded at me, a flicker of grudging respect in her eyes. She saved my life. Kale's gaze locked with mine. The silence stretched between us, thick with all the things we hadn't said, all the truths that now lay exposed between us. The lie of his tyranny, the secret of the plague, the suppressed mate bond that pulsed in the air, a living, breathing thing. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me? About the sickness? About us?" He flinched as if I'd struck him. He looked away, toward the dark, sprawling forest that was his kingdom and his prison. How could I? How could I tell the woman whose home I'd stolen that I was her mate? How could I ask you to bind yourself to this cursed life? His voice was raw with a pain he could no longer conceal. I had to be a monster. I had to be a conqueror. It was the only way to gather the resources, to enforce the quarantines, to give our people a chance. There was no room for a mate, no room for anything but the fight. "You didn't have to fight it alone," I said, my heart aching for him, for the lonely, impossible burden he had carried. He finally looked back at me, his eyes filled with a weary sorrow that was 1,000 years old. I didn't know how to ask for help. I only knew how to take. He took a hesitant step closer. "The bargain I made with you, it was the most dishonorable thing I have ever done. But your lands, the moon petal, I was desperate. I never intended for the mate bond. The moon goddess has a cruel sense of humor." He reached out, his hand hesitating just before it touched my cheek. "Elara, the ceremony is done. The blood is mixed. But the final step, the claiming, it has to be a choice. After everything I have done, every lie I have told through my silence, I release you from your vow. Your pack will be protected. My word as Alpha. You are free to go. You can return to your people or go wherever you wish. You do not have to be shackled to me." He was offering me an escape, the very thing I had been dreaming of, fighting for. But the freedom he offered now tasted like ash in my mouth. To leave him now, knowing the truth, felt like the greatest betrayal of all. To leave him to face this darkness alone, I couldn't do it. My wolf, my heart, my very soul screamed in protest. I looked at this Nan, this Alpha, this king. I saw past the scars, the blood, and the monstrous reputation. I saw the protector, the savior, the lonely warrior who had sacrificed his own honor and a chance at happiness for the sake of his people. My mate. I stepped forward, closing the space between us. I raised my hand and placed it against his cheek, my fingers tracing the line of a fresh scar. He flinched at my touch, but didn't pull away. He closed his eyes, leaning into my hand like a man starved for warmth. "I'm not going anywhere," I whispered. The words were not a surrender this time. They were a vow, a choice, my choice. "You said it yourself, Alpha. The packs are one. Your fight is my fight. Your people are my people." I took his bloody hand in mine, lacing my fingers through his. Our matching wounds pressed together. "Let me help you. Let me stand with you. Don't push me away again." A single, shuddering breath escaped him. He opened his eyes, and the last of his walls came crumbling down. The cold, empty Alpha was gone, replaced by a man so full of pain and hope and a desperate, yearning love that it took my breath away. "Ilara," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. Under the light of the full moon, surrounded by our people, he lowered his head and claimed my lips. The kiss was not gentle. It was a raw, desperate collision, a release of all the pain, the loneliness, and the unspoken longing that had festered between us. It was a seal, a promise, a claiming that was more powerful than any ancient ritual. It was the joining of two souls who had been forged in sacrifice and fire. In that moment, I knew I was home. I had agreed to marry a monster, and in doing so, I had found the hero who had been protecting us all along, and I would stand by his side until the very end. The months that followed were a testament to the strength of our new unified pack. The fortress of Blackwood began to transform. The oppressive, fearful silence was slowly replaced by a quiet, determined hum of activity. My Silvermoon pack, once they understood the truth of Kyle's actions, integrated with a fierce loyalty. Their grief for their lost independence channeled into the fight against our common enemy. My father, having recovered from his injuries, stepped down as Alpha, becoming a valued elder and advisor, his pride in me finally eclipsing the shame of his defeat. My place was no longer just in the infirmary, though I spent much of my time there, working alongside Morwen. With the steady supply of moon petal from my homeland, we were able to develop more effective treatments. We couldn't cure the fading sickness, not yet, but we could manage the symptoms, easing the pain of the afflicted and, in some of the early-stage cases, even slowing its progression. I became the Luna in truth, not just in title. The people who had once looked at me with suspicion now came to me for guidance and comfort. I was the heart of the pack, the balance to Kel's iron will. Kel himself seemed to shed a skin of old grief. The burden was still immense, but now it was shared. He no longer stalked the halls like a restless shadow. He would seek me out, finding me in the herb garden or the library, and we would talk for hours, sharing strategies, hopes, and fears. The cold, empty Alpha was a memory, replaced by a leader whose strength was tempered with a compassion I was beginning to realize had always been there, buried deep beneath layers of necessity and sacrifice. Our nights were our sanctuary. In the privacy of our chambers, the Alpha and Luna would fall away, leaving only Kel and Ilara. He was a tender, passionate lover, his touch a reverence, as if he still couldn't believe I had chosen to stay. He would trace the scars on my body, and I would trace his, each one a story of a battle fought, a burden carried. In those moments, there were no secrets, no walls, just two mates who had found each other in the darkest of nights. He never spoke of love, not in words, but he showed me in 1,000 different ways. In the way he looked at me across a crowded hall, in the way his hand would always find mine, in the fierce, protective growl that would rumble in his chest if anyone dared to show me disrespect. One crisp autumn evening, we stood on the high cliff where our union had been forged. The moon was a slender crescent, a silver sickle in a sky full of stars. The air was cold, but I was warm, wrapped in his arms, his chin resting on the top of my head. Below us, the fortress was aglow with lights. Laughter, a sound I had once thought impossible within these walls, drifted up from the courtyard. We had lost people, we had sacrificed much, but we were surviving. We were building something new, something stronger. "We received word from the scouts today," Kel said, his voice a low rumble against my ear. "The packs to the east are finally acknowledging the threat. They are asking for a council. They're afraid," I said. "They need our help." "They need our leadership," he corrected gently. He squeezed my hand. "Our leadership." I leaned back against his solid chest, a sense of peace settling over me. The road ahead was still long and fraught with danger. The fading sickness was a shadow that still loomed over our world. But for the first time, there was a real, tangible hope. We were not just a fortress fighting a plague. We were the beginning of a cure, a beacon in the darkness. He turned me in his arms to face him, his gray eyes soft in the starlight. He brushed a stray strand of hair from my face, his calloused thumb stroking my cheek. He didn't need to say the words. I could see them in his eyes, in the gentle curve of his lips. The monster was well and truly gone, replaced by my mate, my partner, my king, and I was his queen. We were two halves of a whole, bound by blood, by choice, and by a love that had been born from the ashes of sacrifice. We would face the coming dawn together.